Good evening and welcome to The Turning Point. I'm your host, Reverend Wendell Anthony. As you know, The Turning Point is brought to us once a week by the Freedom Institute for Economic, Social Justice, and People Empowerment. And we strive to bring issues and individuals that are doing things that are significant and impacting on our community. And certainly one of those is, of course, the recent election and all that has been involved in that and all that we're still dealing with, the remnants of an election and what will happen as a result of the same, the result of what's going to happen now that we're in this post-election period as it relates to the president and his team, vice president and her team, and all the efforts that you and so many people across the country put in. I'm pleased tonight that we're going to have joining us as our guest the president and CEO of the NAACP, the historic civil rights organization that's been around since 1909, and that is Attorney Derrick Johnson. He's going to be coming to us from Mississippi. You know Mississippi down there deep south, now bringing its stuff up north and across the country to try to make a difference. And I get confused nowadays because I think that Michigan is becoming the Mississippi up north. When you think of what we've just come through in terms of the election, when you think of the way people have been trying to steal it, the threats made against our governor, the threats against her life, and the nooses, the crosses, the guns that were on the steps of the state capitol. The fact that Michigan is the home of the largest assembly of militia, and they're really terrorists in many cases. I think we're too polite when we call them militia. The militia grew out of what we had back in the day when we had a nation and people came together to defend themselves against the British and other folk. They created a militia and folk to guard and protect the interests of the people, so to speak. But now many of these people are trying to take the lives of the people in a way that reduces their rights. And so we don't want Michigan to become as that or like that. But unfortunately, this is where we are today. So tonight we're going to be talking about the NAACP, what it's about, its priorities. And just recently, the president and CEO sent a letter along with 6 other civil rights organizations talking about the need for inclusivity on the part of this administration. Now, I believe, as do others, that it's going to be an inclusive administration. And some people say you make your move too soon and be patient. And let's calm down and let's see what's going to happen. But, you know, when you study long, you study wrong. And so it's important that we don't wait until after the fact to make sure that we state our case before the facts. And so I think that's one of the reasons why we want to talk to President Johnson. And on the continuous saga about the relevancy of the NAACP in 2020. I hear it, you hear it. But were it not for the NAACP, you could not be doing a lot of the things that you're doing now. We probably would not have the first African-American vice president of the United States of America. And so there's still a reason and a necessity for an organization. I always say that when folk get in trouble, they call one of 2 C's. They call either JC, Jesus Christ, or the NAACP, the oldest civil rights organization in America. I tell everybody, make sure you leave home with one of those, if not both of those, in your pocket and in your heart, because you're going to need them. And so stay with me as we now have a conversation. We're just going to talk to the president and CEO and get his take as to where things are and where we are in terms of the whole question of civil rights. And now that the election is over, even though Mr. Trump is still pretending as if the results are not what they are and that it ain't what it is. He would say it is what it is, but he want to pretend like it ain't what it is. Quite frankly, it is what it is. I don't care how you count them, how you fold them, how many times you go to court, how many times you send Rudy Giuliani around. He was just in town last evening up at the Michigan State House. It was a good show for entertainment, but nothing really came out of that because the results have not changed. And so here we are. And so we're pleased this evening to welcome Attorney Derrick Johnson, who was a former Detroiter who used to live here and who, I believe, went to high school here. I don't know the high school he went to. I went to Central High School, as many of you know. So if there was another high school, I don't know what it was. But at any rate, maybe he'll say what high school he went to. Welcome, Attorney Derrick Johnson, back to your hometown of Detroit.
Oh, good to be here. Just know I didn't go to that little school called Central. They had it closed down. Just know that much.
I see. Okay. All right. What high school did you go to, Derrick?
Western.
Oh.
Western.
Well, we won't hold that against you, but at any rate,
Yeah.
Tonight we're facing a lot of issues. We just came through one of the most challenging elections of our time, and black folk came out in numbers. And I want to really be specific tonight. We believe in all people, and we talk about persons of color. But black people came out in droves and supported this administration. What did the NAACP do in this election perhaps had not been done in previous elections? Because I feel from personal experience there was a much greater, deeper penetration and effort that was made. Your thoughts?
We did. NAACP. We played a crucial role in this election cycle. We targeted 12 states. We had the biggest black radio buy outside of anyone other than candidates in all 12 states. And if you notice, the traction where we won are all the areas that we targeted, whether it's Milwaukee, city of Detroit, Wayne County, Philadelphia, Allegheny County with Pittsburgh, Metro Atlanta. Those were some of our target areas. It was very clear if you look at the data from 2016 that black folks will make the difference in this election cycle. So we had to double down to turn out the vote like we've never seen before. So from the efforts of the Detroit branch of the Michigan State Conference, it goes from losing the state by 11,000 votes with a lower black turnout, increasing the black turnout, and winning the state by over 140,000 votes. That shows you the power of our muscle, the power of our vote, and the focused approach we took across the country to make sure we save this democracy.
Let me ask you, Derrick, in terms of the NAACP and that effort, because we did make a tremendous effort around this country, and it was a different kind of an effort. And a lot of people still question, you hear it, I hear it, about the relevancy of let's get this out the way real quick, about the relevancy of the NAACP. It's an old fogey organization filled with people of the old guard. It's too old, it's outdated, outmoded. What's your response to that?
Well, one of the things we have to recognize when things are factual. You and I both know we need to do some retooling. I spent the last 3 years working to retool from the national staff out, but at the same time, recognizing what's factual. We're the only organization with feet on the ground in 47 states. We're the only organization that have more feet on the ground in a state like Georgia, where you got 159 counties, and we are in over 140 counties. We're the only feet on the ground that can translate the ills and the pains of our community and translate that into public policy and advocate for municipal ordinance change or state legislative impact or federal discovery. It is our ability to be interpreters from those who may not have a voice otherwise, all the way up to those who think they have more voices than they really do, because we're the NAACP, a bottom-up structure that represents the needs and interests of our community, but we also reflect the diversity in our community. So the relevancy is only a question of how people locally engage, participate, and breathe life into the mission.
Let me ask you this, and for people that are at home looking, if you have a question, you can certainly go into the chat area or go into the area where you might write your question or type a question in, and we'll ask the question within the time period that we have. Derrick, one of the things that black folk really have an issue with is that when it comes to the NAACP, they want the NAACP to be everything to everybody. We not only have to deal with civil rights, but we have to deal with food and hunger. We have to deal with health care, testing folk. We have to deal with people getting out of jail and keeping them out of jail. We have to deal with education. We have to deal with income inequity. We have to deal with corporate and business opportunity. We have to deal with immigration issues. We have to deal with, they moved me out of my house, and so now I ain't got nowhere else to live. We have to deal with all those things, and when you're not dealing with all of those issues, it makes people feel as though you're not doing nothing because you're not helping me. The interesting thing about all of that is, and that's not a complaint, that's an analysis, is that most of the people we help are not even members of the NAACP. They are people on the outside of the organization. How do you address that? And it's a big elephant, and many folk expect the NAACP to eat the elephant in one bite.
You know, I've always taken the approach that we are only as effective as the volunteers around the table at that time. It is our job, our mission, to do all we can to keep a door open so people can understand how they can breathe life and participate and add value. And it's not a selfish theology, it's a community reality. And if you don't have people breathing life into the mission, the interests that they hold dear, when you need the vehicle will be out of gas. So I tell people, don't come just when you need help. Be there when others need help so others can be there for you as well.
Can you say what the core mission of the NAACP is? I'm not saying we're not dealing with all that other stuff, but the core mission, so people really understand it. And the majority of the people who work in the NAACP are volunteers. We are a voluntary organization. We're not paid to do this. We have a national president and CEO. He's paid because of the work that goes administratively. But in terms of the people that are in the field, the 47 states that we are in, these are volunteers. They work, they go home, they go to church, they go to temple, they go to mosque, they go to school, they got kids, just like everybody else out there. But the reality is we are still called to do the work.
So just understand, so from the time I got to college, 1990, all the way up until 3 years ago, I've been in this position 3 years, I was a volunteer. You and I know that there are so many people who go to work all day, then they come and go to the NAACP meeting. That's just the reality of what it is. We cannot rely on a Savior to come get us when a Savior is within all of us to do the work that's required of us. And that's the reality we have to rest with. The mission of the organization is a proactive mission to improve the quality of life of, and we list several areas. And then the reactive part of the mission is what people come to us for, is to fight against discrimination. If we have more people at the table working towards improving the quality of life of, we will eliminate the discrimination before it takes root. But it only takes root because so many of us only see our own self-interest and not the community interest. I say this oftentimes, we must be a community-centric movement, not an egocentric movement. Because egocentric movements fail every time, but community-centric approaches always will succeed, always will succeed.
Let me say this to you, because just recently, and you were on with Blitzer before you came to Window Anthony tonight, and I'm glad you were able to make it, but you just sent a letter, and there were 7 organizations that were on that letter, according to what was reported. Among them, the National Action Network, the Leadership Council for Civil Rights, Urban League, and some other folk. But the only organization, Derrick, that was called out really as a signer on that was the NAACP. And I want to say that again. There were 7 organizations, and not minimizing any of them because all of them are important. But the organization that they singled out was the NAACP, in terms of the civil rights organization that sent the letter to the Biden-Harris administration talking about the need for more inclusivity and the fact that we need to be following up on our commitment to make sure we have a representative cabinet and black folk are at the table. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think it's because I'm pretty. Well, tell the truth.
Yeah, okay, all right,
It's because
fine.
it's me.
Okay, other than that.
It's because we are the largest. We are the most effective. We are able to really press the flesh around issues that's important. You know, it's interesting. And you and I, we shared this before I took this role. We were not satisfied with how things were going prior to me taking this role. And we wasn't satisfied because we realized that we were punching below our weight. We are a brand identity that's recognized around the globe. I was on a call yesterday with brothers in Denmark, in Finland, who are trying to start a black TV station. They reached out to, why are you calling us? He said, because you're the NAACP and we want advice on how we can do it. We're identified brand. We identify because we've been successful. We've been able to weather the test of time. The other 7 organizations are good organizations. They're people we coordinate with. The Legal Defense Fund, we created the Legal Defense Fund. The Leadership Conference on Civil Rights, we created the Leadership Conference on Civil Rights. The Lord's Committee, they need our feet on the ground to file the lawsuits that they look for. The Urban League started the year after us, but they're a service organization. They're not an advocacy organization. Then you have NAACP. We are by far the largest. No other organization compared to us. But it's incumbent upon us to make sure we are good stewards of this organization, to grow this organization, to mature this organization to 2020 strategies, because one of the things that will fail us if we continue to use 1960 tactics today, it is our job as incumbent upon us to begin to look towards 2030 and build towards a future and not rely on the legacy of a past.
Let me ask you this, because I want to get to the priorities that the organization has from the Biden-Harris administration. What do you see? What kind of things do you want to see coming out of that? Do we want to see? And when I say we, I'm really talking about for the African-American and minority community and those who are often left out and who are not included at the table. One of the things, though, that before we get there is that in the communication that you sent to President Biden-elect and to Vice President-elect Harris, is that you indicated that it's very important that the meeting with the historic civil rights leaders take place. And it's important that we follow up with regards to the concerns that they have had. You indicated that problem is before all the appointments are made, the reality is that there needs to be some discussion about input and activity and appointments from the African-American community. Mr. Biden said in his speech on November the 7th that black voters stood up once again for him. They had his back. And so he said to the African-American community that you stood up for me, you always have had my back, and therefore I'm going to have yours. I want to share something with you. If we can run that slide, I want to show the current appointments that President-elect Biden and Harris have made, or particularly that have been made towards the cabinet. Can we run that slide? We have the slide. I just want to show these are the appointments, the African-American appointments to the Biden-Harris team thus far. If you look at them, and there may be others, but right now this is what we know. Kamala Harris, who was elected, she wasn't appointed, she was elected as the first African-American, as the first African-American, an Asian woman to the vice presidency of the nation. Then we have appointments. Linda Thomas Greenfield, the United Nations ambassador. I know her. I met her while on a trip to Africa years ago. Very nice lady, very well equipped for this position, very good person. Then you have Adewale Wale Adeyemo, who is the Deputy Secretary of the Treasury. We have Cecilia Rouse, who is the Chair of the Council of Economic Advisors. You have Karen Jean-Pierre. She's the principal White House Deputy Press Secretary. You have Simone Sanders. She's chief spokeswoman and senior advisor for Vice President Harris. Corinne Jean-Pierre was the sister that intervened during the campaign when the brother jumped up on the stage and tried to connect with Kamala Harris. She was a sister that pulled them out and got in between them. That was Corinne Jean-Pierre. We know Simone Sanders. Ashley Etienne, Communications Director for Vice President Harris. Cedric Richmond, Senior Advisor to President Biden and Director of Office of Public Engagement. And then persons of color, Nira Tandon, who was being nominated for the Office of Management and Budget, and Julie Chavez Rodriguez, Director of White House Office on Intergovernmental Affairs. Now go back to those black appointments. Linda Thomas Greenfield, she will be in the cabinet. Cecilia Rouse will sit in the cabinet meetings. Cedric Richmond will sit in the cabinet meetings. They will be a part of the cabinet. They'll be close to the president and the vice president. Those are very significant appointments. And I want to share with you a number of appointments that we had for the African American community in the Trump-Pence cabinet. Can you show that slide? The Trump-Pence cabinet. No, the Trump-Pence. Keep going. Keep going. This is the African American members of the Trump-Pence cabinet. Dr. Ben Carson, Secretary of HUD. That's who we got, y'all. That's the appointment that black folk got in the cabinet of the current administration. And yet he's done more for us, so he said, than Abraham Lincoln or since Abraham Lincoln. And that's what we got. Now, go back up to the slides where we have pending cabinet positions still to be held. Scroll down. Keep going down, 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 down. Right there. These are cabinet positions that still need to be filled. U.S. Attorney General, Secretary of HUD, Secretary of Education, Secretary of Transportation, Secretary of Defense. Scroll down. Secretary of Health and Human Services, Secretary of Labor, Secretary of Agriculture, Secretary of Commerce. These are still some, and maybe the Secretary of Energy that may have been taken, Secretary of Interior, Secretary of Veteran Affairs. So, now, Derrick Johnson. Trump had one. Biden already has more people than Trump ever had in the 4 years he was in office. What do you people want? I mean, why are you so impatient? Aren't they going to do? Aren't they doing what they already said they're going to do?
Appointments. This is about ensuring that in all decisions, civil rights is centered in the conversation. I don't care whether or not the person is going to be black in the department or white department. They still need to view policy decisions from the eye of civil rights. We know we can't get all the appointments. We know that everything we want is not going to be what's there. But it's a value proposition. If this administration can announce the creation of a whole focus area that's a priority around environmental justice, and then appoint a former senator who's a billionaire in that position, you know, one, he will have budget, he will have authority, and he will have the ability for oversight over all of those departments. But we need something equal. We're doing the exact same thing. That no matter whether we talk about the Department of Defense or the Department of Agriculture, there is a racialized lens that needs to be put in place so that we can ensure we don't cause some unintended harm. Let me give you two examples. There's been a discussion around the former mayor of Chicago being appointed Secretary of Treasury.
You talking about Rahm Emanuel?
In a vacuum, looking only at his resume, well, he's qualified. He was the chief of staff, he's been the mayor, he's been a congressman. But then when you put a racialized lens on it, He's also been someone who covered up the murder of a black man in Chicago so that he can get reelected before he released the tape. He's also someone that should not be in this administration. You talk about the former Secretary of Agriculture, someone whose resume looks good. He's a former governor of Iowa. He's worked with all types of agricultural concerns. He understands the nature of farming. But then you put a racialized lens on it. Here's someone who served there. He fired unjustifiably Shirley Sherrod, a civil rights icon, who now lives in Southeast Georgia, who everyone look up to, have always been advocated for rural black farmers in Georgia, but we want black folks to turn out to vote November 5th. That's when you put your racialized lens on it. Here he is, he's sitting here. You have black farmers who've been discriminated against. We've had massive black land laws, and when it was time for him to fix the injury, he didn't do it. They had to go to Congress. They got it done, and he still didn't forgive the loan. So even though they got a settlement, they looked up and still had a note against their property. But why should these people be sitting in any consideration for an appointment? Because there's no racialized lens. That's what we're talking about. It's not about the individual appointment. It's about the totality of the priorities that this administration will put forward to ensure that black folks are not only protected, that's reaction, that black folks can advance, that's proactive. That's about our mission.
You see, when you look at that, you also keep in mind that you have Kamala Harris, who's at the table. You have a Cedric Richmond, who's going to be at the table. You have a Simone Sanders, who may not be a member of the cabinet, who's going to be at the table. And you know as well as I do, there are people who are not in the White House that still have the ear and the counsel of the president and vice president that they value. That comes with it. And so right now, when you look at that, and it's not a question of the individual or the position, but it's a question of being able to impact the policy. Most people don't know it, but each department has a civil rights division or component, which is supposed to address the issues of inequity and racial issues and to try to equalize and make the opportunities level, so to speak. Certainly one of those areas, Derrick, has to be the position of Attorney General for the United States of America. We know what we don't have right now. But when you and I look at the position of Attorney General, let's say, as one of those positions, the AG is critical to police reform. It's critical to civil rights and to human rights. It's critical to police departments dealing with issues of decrees, consent decrees. Following that, one of the things that President Obama and Biden had when they were in the White House, they created the 21st Century Policing Task Force. And it had the policies for reform and for how to deal with police and community relations. When Trump came in, they eliminated all of that. They negated that. They stopped that. And so you now have what you have. More people dying all over the country. We have not seen the implementation of the George Floyd Justice Act, which has been stuck in the Senate. Mitch McConnell won't move it. And now we have a new administration. Do you hold out hope? And certainly as we think about the AG's office, is that something that the NAACP is pushing very strongly for to have an impact there? Do you see a coming back of the table to help shape these policies and to be able to impact in a real meaningful way?
We're absolutely going to push it. So you know, it's table setting time now. We have a president-elect. They are creating their cabinet. They are reviewing their appointments. But we don't want to be there only for the outputs. We need to be there for the inputs. And so the reason why the letter went, the reason why we got to have a conversation, so we can be a part of having input, because they love our output. We turned out and we created the cell to allow him to get elected. That's great output, but now it's time for some input. And that's what we're talking about. When table setting time, when we look at what's going to take place in Georgia, January 5th, the outcome of that election will determine how much can be advanced in terms of public policy, how much we have to settle with in terms of executive order. That's that evaluation so we can set the table properly and then we can provide the right input. That's what this moment is all about. Let's not get caught up in the transaction of one appointment versus another appointment, because we've seen in the past people get appointed and their whole portfolio gets snatched from under them. Their ability to have the autonomy to do the things that's necessary will get impeded. Their ability to have a purse string that they can really operationalize gets suffocated. So now we need to talk about inputs so those things will not happen, especially if we don't get control of the Senate.
I want to come back to Georgia because Georgia is a key important, but on the issue of the AG, I'm going to throw out a few names and see your reaction to them. Tony West, who used to be a part of the Obama administration. Deval Patrick, who used to be, or the governor of Massachusetts. Letitia James, prosecuting the AG up in New York. When you hear names like that, what's your reaction to them?
Well, there are many qualified individuals who can serve in that role, but we need someone who will have the tenacity to go after the domestic terrorists that we know are white supremacists. They've had a free hand for the last 4 years. You've had these militia groups stockpiling their weapons and plotting to cause harm to individuals, including, as you well know, the governor of Michigan. We've had Facebook being used as a platform, and this is on Facebook Live, for groups to organize and recruit and carry out harm, including the murdering of a federal officer in the Bay Area. We need an AG who's willing to be bold and step out and address these domestic terrorists, have them make sure they're accountable. We should not, as a nation, allow ourselves to be snookered, which is going to happen, thinking that the enemy is outside of the borders, when over the last 4 years we've seen demonstrated time in and time out, the enemies are actually within the borders. Whether you look at what took place in Charlottesville or the massacre that took place in Pittsburgh at the synagogue, or the attempted massacre in Louisville, Kentucky. Fortunately, that church doors were closed, but the guy still went to the Krogers and killed people. Those are domestic terrorists. We know where they are. We need a Justice Department that's bold enough, strong enough to go after those individuals. Very similar to what we're seeing with the Attorney General of New York, Letitia James, and how she's bold and clear and focused and taking down both the NRA while at the same time addressing Trump and his tax misdeeds at the exact same time. We need that type of boldness.
Let me ask you this, because we have a few questions. What will be the NAACP's agenda for the Biden administration? Do we have a list of concerns that we're putting on the table for him? That's a question we got.
But wait, the agenda will have to be modified by what's possible. What's possible will be set after the January 5th election. If it is possible to accelerate, there's a lot of repairing that needs to get done financially for African Americans and other critical workers who have been impacted by this global pandemic. We have to address the consistent undermining of public education. It is horrific what they've done to Detroit Public Schools, a sovereign school district that the state was able to come in, take control, bankrupt it, and turn it over to a bunch of privatizers so they can exploit kids too. We have to have legislation to stop those things from taking place. We need to deal with the student loan debt crisis. The largest employer of African Americans in this country is government, whether it's local, state, or federal. Many of those individuals who work for those agencies went to school. They did everything people told them to do, but they incurred a lot of student debt. And they're critical workers now. We need to address the student loan crisis. I can go on and on and on about the multitude of things that need to take place, but that will all be determined whether or not we have control of Congress. Congress controls the purse string. And what cannot be done through Congress has to be done through executive order, which there can be a lot of things, but there are some limitations. So that's why we have to understand what's possible will be determined January 5th, runoff election in Georgia.
We keep going back to Georgia. A lot of black folk want to help when it comes to Georgia. I mean, you had Stacey Abrams, who was, I guess, the kind of the activist star down there. You got Sherry Sherrod, of which people have forgotten about, who was a strong sister back in the day, and there were some issues with her, but she has certainly earned her stripes, who's down south. I mean, what do you say to black folk that want to help? And how critical is that election? What do you see? What's your, if you were to call it and to see it, how are you feeling about what's happening in Georgia?
I lost you a little bit there. It broke up. Say that one more time, please.
The Georgia situation. A lot of folk are interested in helping in Georgia. A lot of black people, they want to go down there. They want to send support. It's important to remember that Stacey Abrams, yes, she's done a great deal of work there. Sherry Sherrod is there,
We don't
etc.
need anybody to go down to Georgia. We need people to support Georgians to turn out their neighbors. It's like saying, do we need people to come in from outside to walk and turn out the black vote Detroit? If we do, we got a problem with Detroit. I think the Georgia have proven and demonstrated an ability to organize and turn out the vote. Stacey Abrams won in 2018. Make no mistakes about it, they stole it. And because they couldn't steal it this time, the outcome was different. The voting electorate in Georgia is turning more progressive, it is getting blacker, and it's getting stronger. And so if you want to support Georgia, you can do phone banking into Georgia. You can contribute to one of the campaigns or to one of the efforts. But that's really important because Georgia is not a state race. This is a national race that will have global impact.
You mentioned the term progressive, and we hear a lot of that. People say, well, I'm a part of the progressive group, I'm a conservative, I'm a moderate. I mean, I'm progressive, and I'm conservative, and I'm moderate. It depends on what the issue is. I mean, progressive used to be simply freedom fighters. Freedom fighters were the ones that put themselves in the line, who called for election reform, who called for income equality, who called for jobs, who called for housing, who called for the right to vote. They put themselves on, they were progressive in that. And now it's like, unless you, and progressives are saying that we got to have all of this and all of that. You got the issue with Obama talking about we shouldn't use the term defund the police, and rather we should be talking about reimagining or reapportioning what the police department does. I mean, what's your take on that? When I hear people saying, well, I'm the progressives, and if you ain't with this program, that you're not with the program, where are we as an organization in terms of progressives, conservatives, and all that stuff?
Let's be very clear, NAACP will always, by definition, we must be progressive. To conserve is to conserve the status quo. The status quo isn't working for black folks. It has never worked for black folks in this country. We've always had to progress how the status quo is destroyed so we can have a new norm. So at every iteration, we are trying to progress society to live up to that social contract we call the Constitution, to ensure that all men and women are created equal and endowed with certain inalienable rights, that equal protection of the law is afforded to all of us. That's about progressing the status quo from what we know it to be. Now, other communities and other individuals may define it differently, but that ain't my issue. My issue is only my community and how we are moving this train we call the NAACP towards progress, looking at the future, not the status quo.
When you hear the term defund the police, what does that conjure? What does that mean to you? Or how do you approach that?
I didn't understand the question.
When you hear the term defund the police, how do you approach that? There's a lot of discussion around defunding police departments, defunding their budgets. You know, how do you approach that?
It's interesting. Defund the police mean different things to different people based on their perspective in the community that they come from and the harm law enforcement agencies have imposed on their communities. If I lived in Ferguson or a similarly situated scenario, defund police means stop militarizing these weekend warriors and allowing them to use the money from the city coffers to go buy surplus military goods. If I lived in Minneapolis or if I lived in Chicago, defund the police means break up that fraternal order that's the police force that's imposing harm on our community to ensure there's more protection and equity, doing away with qualified immunity, making sure that they cannot negotiate in their contract disciplinary actions against them, and there is a national disciplinary database so law enforcement can't jump from one community to another. If I lived in Baltimore, it means stop allowing people who don't live in my community, who don't come from my community, who are driving hours from their home, who don't care about my neighborhood, terrorizing my neighborhood, so that we can actually protect and serve. So it all depends on where you live. If I'm in New York or LA, where they have gutted social services and they have gutted mental health services, and you're asking police officers to serve in roles that they have not been trained or qualified to do. If you are called out to address someone with mental health issues, you shouldn't have a law enforcement officer do that. You need mental health professionals. If communities are living in trauma, you don't need police officers to police community in trauma. You need social workers to help alleviate the pressure of the trauma. If you have a domestic dispute, you need someone who can de-escalate in the midst of that, because that's the most dangerous place call a police officer can have. So it all depends on what community you live in. That's how you define it.
Does the term get in the way of doing what you just said? Defunding, does that get in the way?
Well, the problem is when you have social media celebrities, they can create terms without a complete analysis on the political ramification of the term. And it's not to badger them, because what really is happening is people are creating terms in response to harm. But when those terms are created, we also have to be able to push back against those who flip it on its head and use it as a political weapon against us. And so it's that natural tension. There was a time when you say Black Power was just like saying defund the police, which was just like saying Black Lives Matter. So How do we embrace our young people who know how to navigate social media platforms to engage people much more effectively than you and I, and not malign them, but pull them more to the center to understand that words have meaning and have political ramifications.
It's interesting you mentioned the term Black Power, because that had the same kind of tension when Stokely articulated that in the civil rights movement between them and Dr. King and Ella Baker and some other folk. The term Black Power, as it was being used, a lot of people didn't understand it, and it created an unnecessary tension when all of them were talking about Black Power. That's what Dr. King was talking about. He was talking about empowering Black people, sustaining them, recognizing them, and giving them, not giving them, but honoring them with what we had earned: housing, jobs, opportunities, etc. Which leads me to a question we just got. What's the relationship between the NAACP and the Black Lives Matter movement, or Black Lives Votes Matter? Again, to me, it's the same thing, but I'm interviewing you, so you respond. What's the relationship between the NAACP and the Black Lives Matter movement, or Black Votes Matter?
Oh, I absolutely embrace them. The three young ladies who started BLM, it was a hashtag they met at a leadership development program that I served on an advisory board to create, with a sister that came out of Ford Foundation, Alta Star. Actually, I was just on the phone earlier with Opal, because she's advocating for the end scars in Nigeria, because she's of Nigerian descent. I will probably be on a call with Patrice later this week, if not next week. So we cannot malign our young people because they choose vehicles that's different than the vehicles that we may be riding in for social justice. But social justice isn't a competition. So we must embrace all of our people, even if they try to nuance a difference about how we approach things compared to how they approach things. That's a beautiful thing, because none of us have all the solutions, but all of us have a responsibility to be engaged with social justice and to progress our community away from the status quo that's causing harm to many in our community.
What do you think, is another question, what do you think are the top 3 issues plaguing the African American community today? If you had, and you are going to have the opportunity, because I think that I heard you say earlier today that there's going to be a meeting next week with President-elect Biden and Harris, Vice President-elect Harris, to discuss some of the concerns of the civil rights community and where we are. So what do you think are the top three issues, if one had to enumerate them, concerning the African-American community? That's the question that was posed.
Well, economic stability, writ large, whether you're talking about the unnecessary debt that many African Americans had to be loaded up with, that's one. Reframing the delivery of quality education for all children. There is a global economy that we've been left behind on because our districts, black or white, are not prepared at this moment to truly participate, and the tech industries are no longer just nationalized. If you think about the platform of Facebook, only about 30% of its users are in the U.S. 30% is outside of the country. That's a new global reality. They have become a sovereign nation within the nation. We are not training our young people to be a part of that type of digitized global economy. And then finally, we need to right-size how people see law enforcement in this nation and make sure that the right type of protections are in place. NAACP was created 111 years ago to advocate against anti-lynching legislation. Why? Because we needed a federal government with the authority and the ability to go into local jurisdictions to investigate, prosecute, and convict individuals who were involved in lynching. We needed to do that because we found that law enforcement agencies on the local level were the main perpetrators of some of the lynchings that were taking place. And so the government ended up getting that authority to investigate, prosecute, and convict individuals who were bad actors. Now we're saying the federal government needs to have that authority to do away with sovereignty immunity, create a national database of police misconduct, and set a national standard for police officers to be qualified to serve, so we don't get individuals who should never been able to put on that uniform in uniform. If you give police officers drug tests today, could they pass? If a police officer who's been on the force for 15 years, you give them a physical exam, would they pass? There needs to be a standard that's constant. If you give them the same test that they took when they became police officers and it was updated to the current standards, that they pass? Those are real questions that we need to be exploring when it comes to our law enforcement infrastructure.
One of the things that, and we got a couple of questions, or one question and comment was appreciative of the opening up of the dialogue between Vice President-elect Harris and President-elect Biden and civil rights community, because that's important. And the fact that we have several folk who may be in that meeting, and a lot of people still looking for a black messiah, a black leader of the likes of Dr. King, and I don't know if that's going to happen. We got a lot of folk who are leading, and a lot of folk who act like leaders, but they're not doing what leaders do. You take risks, you make sacrifice, and you don't please everybody. One of the things that has happened recently during this administration as a priority of necessity is those people who sit behind the bench, Derrick, and they judge us. One of the things that Mitch McConnell and his crew did, the only thing they did was really to appoint federal judges. And they've appointed them to lifetime positions. And you and I can count on a couple of fingers how many of those have been African Americans, and a couple of may be too many. But what is the NAACP? How are we dealing with that? I know we have our man Hillary at the Washington office. He keeps us abreast, and thank God for him. Hillary Shelton, a great servant who keeps us informed. He's head of the Washington Bureau. And as to when the judges are coming down, you know it. You're an attorney. But what are we doing to try to make sure we got some good folk who are going to be judging us for the next 30 and 40 years? Because that's what Trump has done. He has put over 100, almost 200 judges on the bench all around this country, and they're going to be there. These are young, in many cases, they don't have the experience, but they're going to be judging us, civil rights, labor laws, income situation, all the above. What are we doing to address that?
Well, if I understood your question, what are you doing about the federal bench and all of those appointments that Trump made, and what are we going to do about them? Unfortunately, those are lifetime appointments. And I'm going right back to Georgia. January 5th will make the determination if we can begin to appoint judges to the bench to offset what we know would be long-term harms to the Trump federal bench. His legacy, if nothing else, will be his appointments to the bench. And you're talking about individuals who will be there easily 20, 30 plus years.
Right.
And so Georgia's runoff election will determine whether or not we will have the ability in the Senate to begin to right-size the federal courts with appointments that better reflect what the rule of law should be, as opposed to individuals who are going to try to rule the law in ways in which it should be.
Yeah, and that's really where I'm going. I know there's nothing we can do about the ones we got now, but going forward, there has to be a priority on them. Last question, Derrick, the whole question of reparations. You've heard it. It's been discussed. What's the NAACP's position with regard to reparations? And is that a way to resolve the income inequity? That's a question that we have. What's your take on that?
Well, NAACP have supported reparations, particularly H.R. 40, from probably after John Conyers introduced it and began advocating for it. We are on the record from the early 70s all the way through supporting HB 40. The real question with reparation is, what does it look like? How is it allocated? Is it personal in nature? Is it toward institutions? Those are questions that have not been resolved. And we need to figure out how to get to that place. There is a lot of energy lately around the question of reparations. That's a really good thing. And I absolutely support reparations. Personally, the Republic of New Africa, Omar Obadeli, when they made the move to claim the stake in the South around the question of reparations, many people celebrated. And when I left Detroit to go to undergrad, I had the privilege and opportunity to learn from Chokwe Lumumba, to learn from Obadeli once he was released because he was a political prisoner, to sit and hear Geronimo Pratt talk about it. Those are things that are very close and dear. Lou Myers was a big advocate for it. He was one of our early general counsels. And so reparations isn't something that's foreign to the NAACP. It's not something that we ever oppose because I think it's important. Anytime there is a state-imposed injury on a community, there has to be a remedy, and that remedy is called reparation.
Thank you, Attorney Derrick Johnson. I appreciate you being here with us tonight. We could still go on. There's a whole lot that we did not discuss, but as you adjourn from this session, and I know you have your hands full on a lot of other stuff, what is the lesson or the message you want to leave to black folk in Detroit and around the country as it relates to the next 4 years and following January the 20th, somewhere between 12 o'clock noon and 12:15, there's going to be a swearing in of a new team. And so as we look forward, do we let them go, trusting that they're going to do the right thing, or are we in it all the way? What's your message to black people around the country?
FDR had a famous quote saying, "I agree with you, now make me do it." It is going to be incumbent upon us to make them do what they say they agree with. We cannot sit down or lay down and think someone else is going to deliver for us what we should be advocating for ourselves. The fight for social justice and civil rights is not somebody else's fight, it's our fight. And when we fight, we win. The problem is we get too lax and stop fighting. And so that's the reality for the next 4 years. It could be a friendly fight, it can be an aggressive fight, but a fight it must be, because in order for us to get out of what has just taken place, we must put into it what we need to ensure it reflects the needs and interests of our community. Thank you for this opportunity. Have a good night.
Thank you, brother. Appreciate you, Attorney Derrick Johnson, President and CEO of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, and we want to thank him for being with us tonight and for joining us here on the Turning Point. Stay with us. We'll be back next Thursday right here at 6 o'clock. Tell somebody about it. See you then.